This piece of trash? You've probably played it. These are the first few notes of Edward MacDowell's To a Wild Rose. If you've ever studied piano, chances are this is one of the first pieces you learned how to play. But remarkably, a twist of fate saved this piece from being incinerated. It nearly didn't exist at all. Every morning, while having breakfast with his wife Marian on their property in Peterborough, MacDowell would write short little melodies as a kind of compositional espresso to start the day before composing seriously. Usually, these were thrown straight into the fire, but one morning, he missed. The crumpled sheet music was found later by Marian, an excellent pianist herself. She played through it and knew immediately that this was something quite special. When Edward came back later, she showed it to him. He replied,
"It is not bad, very simple. It makes me think of wild roses near the cabin."
And thus, To a Wild Rose was born. I've always wondered what has made this piece stand the test of time so much. What made it that girl? Why does she think she deserves this? The simplicity of this piece is probably why MacDowell aimed it for the furnace in the first place, but it's also a huge part of why it's stood the test of time better than any other American piano piece from the same period, let alone from MacDowell's own compositional output. Part of that is because it's an accessible piece that pianists of any age can play and enjoy. It's beautiful music which can belong to anyone and everyone. But it's also because its simplicity is transgressive. It literally breaks the rules of harmony. That might seem hard to believe, but let me show you what I mean. If you submitted this to a harmony teacher for a grade in 1896, chances are they would have circled most of it in red ink. The opening melody is halting and aimless, and the harmony accompanying it leaves dissonances resonating and unresolved. So let's hear what this piece might have sounded like if MacDowell had harmonized it the right way. Instead, MacDowell's version allows the melody to sing without over-explanation. The simple, almost rustic harmonies create a sense of beautiful melancholy that immediately disappears when you try to harmonize it in a more classical way. MacDowell probably didn't think that those little sketches he wrote that morning could be developed into a serious piece. But it's precisely that kind of simplicity which has given this piece such a long life. MacDowell had big ambitions as a composer. He was born in the US and then went to Germany to study piano and composition and learn the German Romantic tradition. But he also lived for a time in France where he was exposed to the richness of harmony and texture that was being developed by the impressionists of the time. A piece like his second piano concerto probably is a better indication of the kind of music that MacDowell thought he would be remembered for. Grandiose, sweeping, Lisztian, with a full kind of virtuosity that not just any old pianist could pull off. Unlike the image that we have of him, MacDowell was not really a nationalistic composer in the way that, say, Grieg was. He was very skeptical of building a national musical style simply from taking folk melodies and transposing them into grandiose symphonic contexts. He believed that the United States needed to find its own voice through a kind of discovery of a new aesthetic identity. In fact, it was ragtime that MacDowell believed sounded most authentically American, a musical tradition that grew organically out of the culture surrounding it. But he was also much less radical than some of his colleagues like Henry Cowell or Charles Ives, composers who embraced the total freedom of a still developing American musical identity. Ultimately, MacDowell believed that music was something that should be deeply personal and deeply felt. He once said that,
"The origin of music is attributed to the whole range of human emotion. Music is a language, but a language of the intangible, a kind of soul language."
and although To a Wild Rose is certainly one of his simplest pieces, the title alone shows us just how much it meant to him. MacDowell famously loved roses. He was eventually buried beneath a bed of them. And it's even possible that we could say the precise species of wild rose that may have inspired this piece. The entire set that To a Wild Rose comes from, Opus 51, The Woodland Sketches, is kind of like a collection of scrapbook clippings of the nature that inspired him. By the way, be sure to like and subscribe and send this video to someone who you think might be interested. It really helps us to keep telling great piano stories for free here on YouTube. Though much of his compositional output is unfortunately not played so much anymore, MacDowell was still instrumental in developing a distinctly American piano tradition, one that embraced a diversity of inspirations. In general, MacDowell's musical life was quite eclectic. In Europe, he absorbed the French and German piano traditions, but back in the United States, it was the Venezuelan pianist Teresa Carreño, known as the Valkyrie of the piano, who became one of his greatest advocates. MacDowell was the first professor of music at Columbia University, and Marian, his wife, the woman who saved To a Wild Rose from being thrown in the trash, started the MacDowell Colony, which became one of the most important artistic communities in the United States. A few decades after MacDowell's death, it was the pianist Jesus Maria San Romà, a pianist who was really important in bringing the big works of the early 20th century to the United States, who recorded MacDowell's Second Piano Concerto for the first time. So with all that in mind, it makes a lot of sense that one of the most touching recordings of To a Wild Rose is by none other than Van Cliburn. Like MacDowell, Cliburn was a pianist who similarly put American pianism on the map, simultaneously embracing both his Texan roots and his diversely European musical heritage. I think that every artist believes that it's their most important work that will go down in history. But in MacDowell's case, it's not his huge piano concerto or his big symphonies, although those still get played every now and then, but rather a short little 1-minute piece that was destined for the fire. The simplicity of this piece also opens it up to constant reimagining and rediscovery. There's so many wonderful reinterpretations of this piece, like the ragtime version that we heard earlier, or like one of my favorites, this version which seems to put the piece through some kind of black hole. And that's probably the biggest part of why this piece has become such a classic. A work like the Second Piano Concerto is huge, awe-inspiring, virtuosic. It deserves to be heard with an amazing pianist and an amazing orchestra. But To a Wild Rose is simple enough to belong to almost anyone without losing its original identity. And I think that there's something that all of us can take away from this story. I was actually inspired by it to go back and look into my own creative trash bin, so to speak. I'm looking through some of my old Sibelius files, my old .sibs, old pieces that never were performed, never saw the light of day, and I found one that I wrote probably like 15 years ago, and I'm kind of thinking that I probably never shared it with anyone because I thought it was a little bit too simple. I was, trying to compose something more complex and more impressive, but actually there's something kind of nice about this, so I thought I'd just play through it once and see if it holds up. It's not really to a Wild Rose level maybe, but I do think that this piece sounds a lot better to me now than it did when I wrote it 15 years ago. I kind of feel like there's something really nice about how simple it was. I wasn't so much worried about how to make a piece really virtuosic and complex and impressive, and I was just writing something a little bit more intuitive. It's kind of vulnerable to play something old like this, but I hope that it kind of inspires you all to love what you're doing now, to look back at what you did before with a new eye, and maybe we can all learn something from Marian's, pulling To a Wild Rose out of the trash can. I read a short description of MacDowell's grave that really resonated with me and that I really like to think about when I'm listening to or playing this piece. MacDowell loved wild roses, and he's buried on a hillside under a large boulder which is covered with them. He often used to sit there and compose while watching the sun setting behind the mountain ridge. The unusual and long-lasting legacy of To a Wild Rose is a testament to the best aspects of the American piano tradition. One that could create a musical language born of a diversity of cultures, a melting pot of possibility. And it all started with a few notes destined for the fire. Thanks so much for joining us today, everyone. It's always so much fun to dig into some of the great piano pieces and figure out what makes them really, really unique, especially the ones that we think we know so well. I'm curious, what's your favorite piece of MacDowell? Have you played this piece? I mean, I know a lot of people probably have. Have you played the other pieces in Opus 51? I learned the second piano concerto of MacDowell when I was in college, and it was so much fun. I really love that piece, and maybe one of these days I can do a longer deep dive into that one. But let me know what you think I should do a video on next. I'm always excited to hear from all of you. Please like this video and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us to keep doing what we're doing here on YouTube. And no matter where you are in your piano journey, be sure to check out Tonebase Premium, the platform that makes videos like this possible. There are lessons from some of the world's greatest piano teachers on the repertoire that we all know and love. There's so much to discover. Check the link in the description below to get started with a free trial. I'm Robert Fleitz from Tonebase, and I'll see you next time. Gag! Gag! Face crack of the century. Though much of his... You probably played it. Okay.
Hydrate.
Thank you. Jane, we can't use that. Jane, don't use that.